Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani. And once again, I'm talking about a prison. However, unlike the other prisons I've completed episodes on, Andersonville Prison was built for one purpose. It was built to hold prisoners of war, during the Civil War to be exact. Commonly known as Andersonville, as it was built near Andersonville, Georgia, the military prison facility actually had an official name of Camp Sumter. Construction began in early of 1864 after the Union stopped negotiating for prisoner exchanges as their way of preventing the Confederacy from bolstering their own numbers. Additionally, there were other factors that played into this decision, such as the Fort Pillow Massacre of 1864 that all but halted the prisoner exchange. On April 12, 1864, Cavalry Commander Nathan Bedford Forrest and his units surrounded Fort Pillow. Prior to the engagement, Forrest purportedly demanded the unconditional surrender of the Union garrison. Apparently, this is a pretty common practice before a fight began. Again, this is all unconfirmed information, but has moved through the years as truth. That Forrest's men entered and realized that the bulk of the men at this fort were black Union soldiers. They began killing them, even if they surrendered. Forrest eventually conceded that unarmed black soldiers were killed there, and also stated that, quote, the river was dyed with the blood of the slaughtered troops for 200 yards, end quote. It is estimated that during this battle, 500 Union soldiers were killed, while Forrest lost just 50 of his men. History proves impossible to determine whether Forrest knew of the killings as they happened or learned about it after. But in either case, that was another reason that the Union set to end prisoner exchanges. Forrest, if it is true, wasn't the only one that murdered black soldiers. Those that had been captured were often killed rather than to be exchanged for Confederate soldiers. At one point, causing a high-ranking officer of the Union to inform the Confederate side that if they continued, the Union was going to kill all Confederate officers that were waiting for exchange. Again, all these things came together, and it really did end the prison exchange. So, the Confederacy needed more places to put these soldiers that they were housing, and new locations were scouted. And the Confederacy determined Georgia might be the best location to house their captured. See, Georgia wasn't near the front lines, and it was far enough away that Union raiding parties wouldn't attack their supplies either. The land was deemed suitable as well. In November of 1863, Captain W. Sidney Winder was sent out to Georgia to find a place to build a larger prison. Captain Winder found a location near the Southwestern Railroad that also had a good source of water, and from there, the building began. The prison site initially covered approximately 16.5 acres of land, enclosed by a wall. The wall was 15 feet high, and if you're picturing a regular style wall, that would be incorrect. Think of the time we're at. It was back in the fort days, so prisoners cleared the land and used logs as the perimeter wall. The first prisoners arrived at the Camp Sumter, or Andersonville Prison, in late February of 1864. The perimeter was constructed by Confederate slaves and was nearing completion as the first set of prisoners were arriving. This prison was definitely still in construction as they were arriving. The only buildings within the prison were a commissary and a hospital, meaning the arrivals had no suitable place to sleep, and while there was an intent originally to build barracks for them to sleep in, this never came to fruition. Ever. They were forced to use blankets as tents, cardboard, or even create dirt shelters. Even without shelters, for months, approximately 400 men were added to this prison every single day. By June of 1864, over 26,000 prisoners were confined in a stockade designed to house 10,000. As a result of the overcrowding, much like in regular prisons, in June, the prison was expanded, this time to 26.5 acres. The wall of the expansion was constructed in the shape of a parallelogram, that was roughly 1,620 feet long and 779 feet wide. In order to prevent escape by scaling the wall, roughly 19 feet inside the stockade wall was created as a deadline, an area not to have prisoners walk in, and if a person did, the guards in their tower sites, then known as pigeon roosts, had authorization to shoot the prisoners. By August of 1864, the number of prisoners at Andersonville was around 33,000. Still, like I said before, shelters weren't created, and men reported that many of them were naked, barefoot, and filthy, using clothes to hide from the elements rather than wear them. Reports of torrential rains in June and July of 1864 caused many of the men that had dug dirt shelters to drown or be killed by the water and earth. Many volunteers who came in described the men as walking skeletons, reporting that the men kept asking if they were in hell. And here, if you picture the same as Holocaust photos of people that are basically skeleton, this is the same. There are photos to back this up. Andersonville Prison was in operation for 14 months. However, during that time, 45,000 Union soldiers were in prison there, and nearly 13,000 died, as the Confederate government was unable to provide the prisoners with adequate housing, food, clothing, and medical care. Their only source of water was a branch of Sweetwater Creek called Stockade Branch that ran through the prison itself. The creek ended up as a latrine. Union soldiers reported that the Confederate soldiers lived upstream where the water was clean, but would use it to dump their feces and other waste products, fat, which would run downstream to the Union men that were housed there. Food was scarce. The rations were not adequate to meet the needs of any single person. Again, multiple men reported that if a man was too ill to stand in line at 4 p.m., which is when rations were served, they were simply skipped. For reference, they were eating cornmeal and bacon as their main source of sustenance. The bacon, of course, was not cooked, and most didn't have the means to cook the meat. Scurvy ran rampant throughout the prison. The hospital was overrun with sick men, resulting in almost no care there as well. To make matters worse, again, no clothes were given to those housed there. In the heat and the swamp, fleas attacked the men. Sergeant Samuel Carthwell, Company C, 4th Massachusetts Cavalry, remembered, quote, "The camp was covered with vermin all over. You could not sit down anywhere. You might go and pick up lice all off of you, and sit down for half a moment and get up, and you would be covered with them. In between these two hills, it was very swampy, all black mud, and where the filth was emptied, it was alive. There was a regular buzz there all the time, and it was covered with large white maggots." End quote. As a result of these conditions, it shouldn't be surprising that there were many that attempted to escape Andersonville. However, they were basically stuck in a swamp with a large pyramidal wall to contend with, not to mention the 19 feet they couldn't cross for fear of being shot. Still, there are reports that slaves attempted to help numerous Union soldiers escape and had some varying successes. In here, because the conditions were so bad, there are also reports that guys would actually step intentionally into the deadline just so that they could end their suffering, while others say that some, because of the overcrowding, slept so close to the deadline that a few men rolled into the deadline while they were asleep and were shot because of it. When General William T. Sherman's Union forces occupied Atlanta on September 2nd, 1864, moving Federal cavalry columns within easy striking distance of Andersonville, the Confederate Army moved most of the prisoners to other camps within South Carolina and coastal Georgia. From then until May of 1865, Andersonville was operated on a smaller basis. Andersonville Prison ceased operations officially in May of 1865. Most former prisoners returned to their pre-war occupations. In July and August of 1865, an expedition of laborers and soldiers, accompanied by a former prisoner named Dorrance Atwater and A former nurse, Clara Barton, came to Andersonville to identify and mark the graves of Union dead and transform the place into the Andersonville National Cemetery. As a paroled officer, Atwater was assigned to record the names of deceased Union soldiers. While he was there, he feared the loss of the death record at the war's ends, and so he actually made his own copy. That way he could notify relatives of the dead interned there. Still, even with all his efforts and Clara's, 460 of the Andersonville graves had to be marked as unknown U.S. soldier. In total, the Andersonville housed, again, like I said, 45,000 prisoners over its use, and 12,913 were confirmed dead. That number, just so that everyone is aware, is approximately 40% of all Union soldiers that died throughout the South. Almost half died in prison. When the war ended, Captain Henry Wirz, the stockade commander at the time, was arrested and charged with, quote, murder in violation of the laws of war, end quote. Now, who is Captain Wirz? Well, Henrik Harman Wirz was born on November 25th, 1823 in Zurich, Switzerland. He moved to the United States in 1849, where he wanted to become a doctor, and several sources say that he did open up a practice. Moving to Louisiana in 1857, when the war started, he enlisted with the 4th Battalion of Louisiana Infantry. After Bull Run in July 1861, he was sent to Richmond, where he was assigned to guard duty at Howard's Factory Prison. There, he organized prisoners and earned a reputation for being both efficient and callous. He was noticed by General John Winder in late 1861, who then placed Wirz on detachment duty as part of his own prison management team. After Wirz was injured at the Battle of Seven Pines in 1862, Wirz went back to work with General Winder, and by 1864, he was selected to oversee the Andersonville Prison. When he arrived in April, he immediately began to organize the prison to try and improve security and efficiency. He is the one that created the deadline. He also imposed daily head counts. Even with all this, Wirz was not actually in charge of the overall prison. He was merely part of a team of officers that were. His role specifically was daily operations inside the prison. So again, this is where roll call came in, security, as well as he was supposed to be in charge of the issuance of rations and supplies. But there was a different officer in command of the overall prison, and each guard regiment had their own command staff of officers, and all of them outrank Wirz. So you can imagine he didn't have much success with them. The hospital and quartermaster both operated independent of other commands. So again, the quartermaster would be the one in charge of supplies such as clothing, shoes, and tents, etc. So trying to get things from them might not have been that easy. There were even known letters from Wirz requesting assistance with supplies, though that doesn't mean that Wirz was a decent man. Several sources reported that he was hated due to his temper and punishments. Punishments that include hunting prisoners with packs of dogs, shootings, chain gangs, being bucked or whipped, and of course, the stockade. At his trial, he was charged with conspiracy, quote, to impair and injure the health and destroy the lives of large numbers of federal prisoners, end quote. Specifically, he was charged with 11 counts of murder. One Union soldier reported at trial that he escaped, was caught and placed in the stocks for 68 hours without any food. John F. Health, a Union officer, testified in regards to the dogs, stating, quote, I saw a man in a tree. Captain Wirz ordered the man to come down. The man begged the dogs should not be let to hurt him. He made the man come down, and with that the dogs rushed at him. Captain Wirz did not try to keep the dogs off the man. He could have done so, end quote. Another man, O.S. Belcher, testified at trial stating, quote, I heard Captain Wirz say he could kill more Yankees than they were killing at the front. I have seen 20, 30 men killed at or around the deadline and shot in different places around the stockade, end quote. Yet another, John Fisher, a black soldier with the 8th U.S. Colored Regiment, reported, quote, "I received very bad treatment there. I was bucked and gagged and whipped with 39 lashes. I was bucked because I would not go back to work," end quote. Robert Tate, a private with the 52nd Pennsylvania Volunteers, stated, he, quote, "saw Captain Wirz commit act of cruelty. I saw him kick men who were not able to stand on their feet at roll call. If there was trouble with roll call, no rations," end quote. That was just a few of the testimonies that occurred during the Wirz trial. As a result, Wirz was found guilty by a military tribunal, and on November 10th, 1865, his sentence of death was carried out when he was hanged in Washington, D.C. The prison site reverted to private ownership in 1875. In December of 1890, it was purchased by the Georgia Department of the Grand Army of the Republic, a Union veteran organization, but they weren't ever able to fund improvements in the area, and so they decided that they would sell it for $1 to the Women's Relief Corps, or WRC, the National Auxiliary of the GAR. The WRC did have the ability to improve the land in order to create a memorial park. Pecan trees were planted to produce nuts for sale to help maintain the site, and states began erecting commemorative monuments. The WRC built the Providence Spring House in 1901, and the fountain bowl in the spring house was actually purchased through funds that were raised by former Andersonville prisoners. In 1910, the Women's Relief Corps donated the site to the people of the United States. It was administered by the War Department and its successor, the Department of the Army, until its designation as a National Historic Site by Congress in October of 1970. Since July 1st of 1971, the park has been administered by the National Park Service. And that is the end of Andersonville Prison and its really short but horrible legacy of inhumane treatment. To all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.